Welcome back, beautiful people. Today we're going to be taking a look at the indie survival game Northern Lights, which is an open world survival game that takes place in the Arctic tundra. If you've played games like Green Hell, Northern Lights is very similar to this, except for it takes place in the tundra. But before we get into the review of the game, do not forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of this survival game content. So for a little context, I logged about 22 hours of playtime before making this video, but honestly, you could see this doubling if not tripling if you're trying to do all the content available. So 40 to 60 hours of content in a $16 video game, in my opinion, is worth it. That said, at times the game definitely feels like an indie early access game with some of its clunkiness. For a little added context as well, I really only played the story mode on resourceful difficulty, and there's an entirely separate, purely survival mode that I haven't touched yet. Now, if you haven't played the game and want to go in blind, then you probably should stop watching because I will be spoiling smaller parts of the story. The first maybe hour or two of the story mode is very engaging because you're bouncing between objectives and I clearly know what's my next step. It's perfectly balanced in my opinion because while I know my next objective, it's not hand-holding by any means with the nav points. And about the same time you get the snowmobile, the story basically opens up and says, well, find a way off the island, good luck. I get it, it's a survival game and the first part was probably more akin to a tutorial, but it is a bit jarring to kind of just cut the cord like that. Personally, I grew up on games like Morrowind, so I'm used to not having a direct objective via waypoints, but it seems a bit too unguided. It's not all that bad though because there's a lot to be explored on the island, so I was ready to get my exploring on. While the premise of the story though is seemingly simple, you've crash landed on an island, you must find a way to escape, the story does a good job at making you feel very hopeless and alone, wondering if you'll ever get off this Siberian hell of an island. From a survival game mechanic, I really love how Northern Lights has handled the thirst, hunger, and stamina meters, as they do not deplete too quickly so I don't feel like I'm constantly having to babysit and manage my needs. Some games have them deplete so quickly it doesn't even feel remotely realistic. Even when you have to manage your needs, it's really not all that difficult to find supplies because while the Siberian landscape is unforgiving, it does provide all the things you need to survive. The only times where I've come close to dying from survival elements were when I wasn't paying enough attention to my own supplies. As you continue playing, you'll be able to upgrade your clothing to be more suited for the cold, which really helps for events like blizzards. I also like how Northern Lights handles ailments such as infection, fevers, burns, etc. There's generally a clear method at treating these ailments by either taking medicines or utilizing nature to heal yourself. But be careful, not all nature is beneficial and some mushrooms and plants are actually poisonous and can come with more ailments. Another interesting mechanic is managing your own sanity, which a lot of people don't really think about from a survival aspect. The more negative things you have happen to you, your sanity goes down to the point where you will actually start hearing doubts in your own head, eventually leading to physical hallucinations if not addressed. You carry items in your own backpack, and each type, think medicinal, food, and crafting materials, has its own place in your backpack, and you've got very limited storage space for each item type. For example, the space to hold medicine is much smaller than, say, the space for crafting materials for obvious reasons. All that said, you have a max weight of 35 kilograms, roughly 80 pounds for us Americans out there. Once you go over that, you slowly lose sanity due to being encumbered, and you also cannot sprint. Initially, I was annoyed by the weight limit, but thinking more about it, Northern Lights does its best to keep things as realistic as possible, and toting a backpack around that weighs 35 kilograms or 80 pounds is honestly not all that realistic, as a lot of people underestimate how heavy that actually is. For context, on average, most military rucks weigh about 16 kilograms or 35 pounds, and I can personally tell you, carrying a 35-pound ruck over miles is exhausting and not easy. I couldn't even imagine doubling that. With that said, a lot of the weights are not accurate and some of the items' space doesn't make sense to me. The ones most easily to identify because we have real numbers for this is the rifle and rifle ammo. The rifle used, I'm 99% sure, is a Mosin Nagant, which on average weighs about 4 kilograms. But in-game weighs 5 kilograms. Not a big difference, but it does add up. The ammo, on the other hand, only stacks in stacks of 4, which doesn't really make sense to me considering a stripper clip holds 5 rounds and a stack of 4 weighs 0.3 kilograms when in reality it'd be more like 0.13 kilograms. Now I know I'm hardcore nitpicking here, but I'm just pointing out that in reality the weights could be dialed back a bit to make things a little bit more realistic. Enough about me nerding out on gun stuff, and let's talk about the exploration side of Northern Lights. The map is rather large, which means a lot of travel in between places, and at times it does feel like a walking simulator because of how vast the map is. It makes sense to me that there wouldn't be a lot of settlements on this Siberian island due to the environment being very uninhabitable, but little things that you could come up on would add a little more variety and make exploring more interesting. For example, since there's obviously military operations here, like a rundown tank randomly stuck in a frozen pond or a sizable hole that has some loot that you can get from it. Or maybe something creepy like a bunch of frozen dead deer in a small vicinity, hinting to some creature out there that may have done this. I, however, do like how Northern Lights has handled the map, which you start with this small map fragment and you must find the other pieces to complete the map. The only thing that I'd add to that would be roads on the map. There are clearly roads and even signs pointing you in certain directions, but they don't show up on the map, which doesn't really make sense because the maps do show other buildings. Loot found exploring really needs to be reworked in my opinion. As of right now, there really isn't any unique reward for exploring. The only real benefit I saw from exploring is that you can upgrade your cold weather clothing. There needs to be a lot more variety of loot as well, but I can forgive it since it's early access. Like, give me a cool handgun I can find, or maybe even a propane torch for cooking so I don't have to craft a fire to cook food. Please, please, please add some sort of navigation hints when progressing through the story. For example, when I approached the maintenance garage that I had totally missed that small hidden story note, and having the quest update to something like explore the maintenance garage for hints on how to escape. Just something to give us an indication on what we are to do next so we aren't just aimlessly wandering around. There is a snowmobile that you can get pretty early game, which honestly is a lifesaver. I could not imagine having to traverse this massive island on foot. That said, and I can't speak from any real life experience, but driving the snowmobile sometimes is extremely frustrating as I slip and slide pretty much the entire time, especially when not on the road. I'll just be going along and hit a hill and just randomly lose complete control and do an entire 180. Maybe it's that difficult in real life, and if it is, please chime in the comment section below, but it just seems unnecessarily uncontrollable at times. If the uncontrollability is something the devs want, I suggest maybe adding a skill that you can level up, like exploration or something, and as you travel and explore new locations, you level it up, and maybe every 5 levels or so, it increases your ability to control the snowmobile. The other thing is the devs should really consider adding a compass in the snowmobile so I have some idea on what direction I'm going, so I'm not continuously opening the map to see if I'm headed the correct direction. Crafting in Northern Lights is done pretty well, and that it's not a pain to do, nor is it too simple. No point in really reinventing the wheel here. You can craft everything from tools to weapons, and each time you craft you level up, and with leveling up you become more proficient at that craft and you can unlock new blueprints. Being more proficient means that your tools and weapons have a higher durability. You can also build shelters, but since I've been playing the story, I haven't really found the need for them yet. I'd love to see them add maybe a small icon underneath the material required showing how many I have in my backpack. For example, a basic fire costs 8 sticks. It'd be nice if underneath that it said something like, I don't know, 6 sticks in inventory. Or something similar to that, just so I don't have to flick between the tabs and count. Also, maybe a short description of each item would be helpful as well. For example, a stone bidon can actually carry water, but I had no idea that that's what that was for, so I never bothered crafting it. And honestly, I don't think I've ever seen that word written or spoken before, as it appears to be a French term. The devs are French, which makes sense, but, I've just never heard that word before. On the topic of weapons, let's talk about combat, which in my opinion is probably the clunkiest part of the game. Melee combat is honestly quite horrid. The swinging animation is somewhat wonky, and it's even pretty difficult to just straight up hit an animal. At one point, I even threw a spear into a deer, and the deer just ran off with my spear through its body. Thankfully, I found a rifle before I ended up really needing to defend myself, because a rifle is a bit more fun and satisfying when hunting or defending yourself from predators. The good thing with combat though is that it can generally be avoided, and you don't really need to hunt animals unless you want to. Now, speaking of clunkiness, the running animations are wacky as hell, especially with the rifle. I get that they're trying to over-exaggerate things and make it look more apparent that you're sprinting, but I recommend toning it down a bit as it looks pretty comical. So to kind of wrap things up, the devs were kind enough to provide me with a free copy of their game, and I'd honestly anticipated playing maybe 2 or 3 hours and giving a generic review of the game. But as I got into the story though, I was kind of hooked and had to see it through. So with that, I personally recommend going to check it out for an early access survival game. It's definitely worth playing despite some of it not being polished. I will link it in the description below. I'm a bit disappointed to find out that the devs' roadmap to a full release is almost completed, because I do find there's a lot of quality of life items needed in the game. Hopefully though, they continue to update it as it goes along. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please consider subscribing or commenting on if I should check out any other survival games. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time, YouTube. Peace out.